So today's session is about scale development, research instruments, and sampling methods. So the session is divided into three parts. First, we will discuss about scale adaptation, and then we will discuss about research instruments, and lastly, we will discuss about sampling methods. So the first section is about scale adaptation. Now, there are five steps to scale adaptation, and which you need to know as a researcher. First of all, use your theoretical framework as a guidance to search for scales. Search scales on Google Scholar or other search engines, which depends upon your journal of your choice. Read the scales, compare different scales which are measuring the same variables. Choose that scale which is most relevant for your study and incorporate it in your questionnaire. Retest your questionnaire. So these are the five steps in scale adaptation, because your data collection step is coming, and you need to develop your scale following these steps before you start collecting data. So let us discuss these steps one by one. The first step is to refer to your theoretical framework and find scales for the concepts positioned in your theoretical framework. So we have four variables in this particular theoretical framework. We have been discussing the same theoretical framework since our session two, since our unit two. So I will continue with the same example. So the first step is to use your theoretical framework as a guidance to search scales. Okay. So the second step in this process is search for scales. So we discussed this process when we talk about operationalization of concepts in our session regarding variables. We need to see how other researchers who have worked on the similar topic have operationalized or measured the same concept which we are using in our research. So one way to do is to explicitly look for scales of variables in our theoretical framework. For instance, when you type student consumerism scale, it only gives results of a single article. Uh, so when you type, student consumerism scale in inverted commas on Google Scholar, only one results, pops up in your Google Scholar searching. So when we open this article and go to the methodology section to find out how these authors measured student consumerism, we find out that they have used Fairchild and Craig's scale, which is categorically mentioned here. The five-item scale was developed by these authors for the purpose of the study. They used, the scale which was developed by these authors, Fairchild and Craig. Okay. So this scale consists of five items. Now, how can we know that? What were those five questions? Either those questions will be shown in any table in this particular study, or we need to go to the original research by Fairchild and Craig 2014 to find out about those five questions. So now we need to know that what were those five questions, because these five questions will be used in your questionnaire. Okay, so we find out that these five questions were in this article. So we did not need to go to the original article to find out about those five questions to measure student consumerism. So these five questions were given in one of the tables in the same paper. So these are the five questions to measure student consumerism. Now remember, these questions were originally developed by Fairchild and Craig in the year 2014. And when you use the same questions to measure student consumerism, you need to give these authors the credit who developed these questions by referring to them in your methodology section. So you need to give credit to Fairchild and Craig instead of these authors who have used this particular scale. So you need to be very careful that they just use the scale which was developed by Fairchild and Craig. So you need to give credit to these authors, Fairchild and Gray. So these are the five questions. So if you are measuring student consumerism, you can use these five questions to measure student consumerism in your questionnaire. Okay. So you can copy these questions to your questionnaire and make necessary modifications or adaptations if required. So any modification or wording shall be made logically. Usually a pre-test is done. We will discuss about testing after a few slides. Okay, now often there are different ways to measure the same concept because some researchers operationalize the variable as per their own understanding and others do it differently according to their own understanding. So we need to choose the most appropriate scale to measure our variable of interest. And this is related to this week's discussion question activity as well, which we will discuss at the end. So we just want to confirm that whether we have chosen the best scale to measure student consumerism. So we change our query. Our original query fetch only a single scale. So as we know that student consumerism is originally derived from consumer behavior studies. So let us change our searching function and particularly search from consumerism theoretical streams and the scales which is rooted in consumerism theoretical streams, but it is applied on students. So one way to gather relevant results is to use this technique, which I have demonstrated in this particular slide. So you can, use the wording of consumerism scale in inverted commas, use capital and then you can use the word students. Okay, so in this way, all the consumerism scales which have used students as their focus, they will pop up, and then you can get variety of scales instead of single scale which we got in our previous searching query. So you see that the fourth article is measuring student consumerism uh, using student consumerism scale. So keeping in view the consumer behavior theoretical streams, they are measuring student consumerism. So let us see how this paper has measured student consumerism. So we open this paper and start reading how they developed the scale and what questions they used to conceptualize student consumerism. So you may compare the both of the articles, how both articles have measured student consumerism, and choose the best measure that fits well with your research objective. For instance, they have used a 16 item scale. Now it means that there are 16 questions to measure student consumerism in this particular research paper. But in the last research paper, there were only 5 questions. So depending upon your proximity to your understanding of the concept, depending upon their relevance to your research question, you need to choose a single scale. You can either go for their scale, this particular research paper scale, or you can either go for the last scale which we discussed in this particular slide. So you have a choice to go for a single scale, but that choice must be made logically. You must give reasons that why have you chosen one scale over another scale, and you need to give the reasons, you need to give the logic as well. So this week's discussion question activity is targeted towards the same phenomena, that why would you prefer one scale over another scale. Okay, so similarly, you will search scales for other variables as well, like academic entitlements is our second variable in our theoretical framework. Academic entitlement scale is a query you put in Google Scholar. You see plenty of results are furnished, and they are well cited as well. For instance, if you choose the second article, this particular article, if you choose this, and also see the query which we have used. Okay, so it means that this query was very the accurate, because it has fetched reasonable number of search results. So when you go to the second research paper, you see that in the second research paper they have mentioned in the methodology section that academic entitlement scale was developed by this particular author. So they have not uh, you know, given a new operationalization. They have used an existing operationalization. So when we start reading about measurements and instruments, that how these researchers have operationalized the academic entitlement scale, we got very useful information, about this scale. That this scale is originally developed by this particular author. The name of the author is Akakoso in 2002. There are 12 questions in this particular scale, and these 12 questions, they are divided into two factors. These are the name of the factors. So they also modified the scale so that the survey items refer to a specific class or a specific instructor. So they have, give reasons that why they have modified the wording, and you are, expected to provide, similar reasonings as well. Okay, so again, we need to see that whether these questions they are given in the same particular article, or we need to consult the original paper of Akakoso 2002. So if these 12 questions are not reported in this particular paper, we need to go towards the original paper. But luckily, there are 12 questions given in one of the tables of this particular paper. They have again cited the source in the table as well. These are the 12 items which are used to measure, academic entitlement. So now we can copy these questions to our questionnaire and make necessary modifications if required, and any modification in wording shall be made logically. So like these researchers, they have said that they have made, modifications like this one. Instructor in this class should bend the rules for me. Now this is the modification they use. For instance, the original item would be the instructor should bend the rules for me. So they have included this particular phrase in this questionnaire, that the instructor in this class. So they have modified, to reflect that the survey items refer to a specific class or a specific instructor, which is mentioned categorically in their research paper. So you need to make these changes, you need to make these modifications to so that the research scale, the questions, they clearly reflect your research problem that is under investigation. Okay. So after comparing the scales, you need to choose the best one, which is the most appropriate for your research question. So there are, different scales to measure the same variable. So you need to choose the best scale, which is the most appropriate one to measure your variable. So you need to repeat the same process for all the variables in your theoretical framework. So after you have repeated the same process of searching scales, reading articles, how they have used the scale, reading original articles of authors who actually developed the scales, comparing the scales, and selecting the appropriate one for each and every variable in your theoretical framework, you copy them, you place them in your questionnaires, and get its pre-testing done. So this is the fourth step, that you need to choose the best scale. Okay, the last step, the pre-testing. So it is important to test your survey questionnaire before using it to collect data. Pre-testing can help you identify questions that do not make sense to participants, or help it can help you identify problems with the questionnaire that might lead to biased answers, or that might lead to those responses which are not very comprehensible. So once you have finished designing your survey questionnaire, find 10 to 15 people from your target group to pre-test it. While they are completing the survey, ask them to think out loud. Ask them that what particular problems they see in these questions, the way the questions are designed, the way the questions are constructed. So they will give you suggestions that if any question is not understandable, and you need to take those suggestions into consideration and modify your question so that it enhances the understanding level of your questions. So normally this is all that is needed. However, if major changes are needed to the questions or structure, it might be necessary to repeat the pre-testing exercise with different people from target population before starting the survey. So this is the process of scale adaptation, and I I expect all of you to do this process and develop your questionnaires because we need your questionnaires, ready by assignment number 3. You need to incorporate your questionnaires or your research instruments if you are doing, secondary data. If you are, conducting interviews, you need to, know about how you are going to collect your data. So we need to have a clear picture of your data collection tools and your research instruments in your assignment number 3. Okay, so far we have discussed about scale adaptation, but times usually when we talk about scale, we can either go for scale adaptation, which we have discussed in detail. But if there are no existing scales to measure the variable you are investigating in your research, then it implies that your variable is not operationalized. So you will need to operationalize the variable for the very first time, and you would have to break down the concept into, observable characteristics. So any scale include 3 parts, like the concept, the dimensions, and the element. The concept is the variable. The dimensions are the factors, the broad categories of factors that are used to describe that concept or variable, and elements. They are the specific questions which are used to measure the dimensions and eventually the concept. For instance, if we go towards the this slide. So in this slide, the concept is academic entitlement. The dimensions are these 2 factors, these 2 broad factors: entitlement expectations and entitlement negotiation. And items are these particular questions. So academic, entitlement is the concept. The concept is divided into 2 dimensions, and each dimension is divided into different parts. For instance, the first dimension is divided into 5 questions, and the second dimension is divided into 7 questions. So this is the whole the structure of academic entitlement concepts operationalization. Okay. So imagine if you if you haven't come across any operationalization of the concept which you are measuring in your theoretical framework. Consider achievement motivation as a concept, how it is operationalized and measured. So the concept of achievement motivation is divided into 5 dimensions. So there are 5 broad categories of achievement motivation. For instance, if we focus upon the first dimension, which is driven by work. Now, you have to define this particular dimension. Driven by work means that the employees would be working almost round the clock, in order to drive the satisfaction of having achieved something valuable. So now driven by work dimension is broken down to 3 elements or 3 questions. Like the first question is, you're constantly working. The second question is that you are not reluctant to take time off for anything. And the third question is that, you're showing perseverance despite a setback. So these are the 3 questions which are used to, measure driven by work dimension, and driven by work dimension is used to measure the achievement motivation concept. So similarly, there are other 4 dimensions as well. This shows that if you have to operationalize and measure a new concept, it is a complete research project in itself, as we need to break down the concept to relevant dimensions and then further break down to relevant elements until that concept is saturated, completely. So that is why we discussed right in the beginning of this session that if you have to, use questionnaire, then use already existing operationalizations, like we discussed about scale adaptation. This is called as scale adaptation. But if you have to do new operationalization, then you need to develop your scales, and developing scale is in itself a new research project, because you need to divide your concepts into different dimensions, and you need to divide your dimensions into different elements until your concept is completely saturated. So this is the way to operationalize, and you need to have a comprehensive understanding of that particular variable or concept which you are measuring. Okay, so most of the students, they are going for scale adaptation. I have been, checking your assignment number 2, and I have not come across any such assignment which is focusing upon developing new operationalization. So I think scale adaptation is most of the students are going for scale adaptation, which is perfectly okay. Okay, so the second part of your today's lecture is about research instruments. So any questions so far about anything which is not clear? The first section of today's session. Okay, so I will continue with the second section. So now we will discuss research instruments. There are, 4 types of research instruments: nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, and ratio scale. So let us discuss each research instrument in detail. First of all, nominal scale. So a nominal scale is one that allows the researcher to assign subjects to certain categories or groups. For instance, with respect to the variable of gender, respondents can be grouped into 2 categories, male and female. So a main characteristic of nominal scale is that one category is not superior, superior to another category. So because there is no ranking between or among categories. So, most of the person information, it is measured through nominal scale, like gender, it is a person information, your whereabouts in the company, your age, your experience. These are, things are measured on nominal scale. So, nominal scale has 2 types: a dichotomous scale, and the category scale. The dichotomous scale is the one where researcher assigns subjects to 2 categories only. For instance, when gender is categorized to either male or female, this is basically a dichotomous scale. So whenever your subjects are assigned to 2 categories, it is a dichotomous scale. Basically, di means two and cotomous means direction. So basically, it is just a two-directional scale. Only 2 response categories are there, and you have to choose one of these 2 response categories. Second scale is, category scale. In the category scale, subjects are assigned to more than 2 categories. So, for instance, when asking employees about their department, there are 7 categories used, so they can choose, that category which is the most relevant to their, personal information. So, a category scale has more than 2 response categories, and the dichotomous scale has only 2 response categories. And nominal scales are often used while classifying your personal information in the questionnaire. Okay, secondly, the ordinal scales. We discussed in the nominal scales that one category is not superior to another category in the nominal scale. But in the ordinal scale, it not only categorizes the variables like nominal scale does, but it goes one step ahead, as it also ranks the categories in some meaningful way. So ordinal scale provides more information than the nominal scale. The ordinal scale goes beyond assigning subjects to different categories to providing information on how respondents distinguish these categories by rank ordering them. So these are, major 2 types of ordinal scale. The ranking scale and the fixed sum scale. These are the 2 main types of the ordinal scale. The examples here are, concerned with the ranking scale. The example of fixed sum scale will be provided in the next slide. For instance, in the first example here, this is the first example. Uh, the respondents are asked to indicate their preference by ranking the importance they attach to 5 distinct characteristics in their job. So, there are 6 characteristics, I would say. So, so these are the characteristics that they need to rank in terms of the importance. So, for instance, I would say, what is the most important characteristic for me? I would say maybe work independently. It is the most important characteristic. Serve others. It may be the second most important. Opportunity interact with others. Maybe the third most important. Completing, yeah, the whole task from beginning to end, etc., etc. So this is how you complete, the importance of these job characteristics to you. The second scale, the second example here is it discuss about it required respondents to rank personal computers used in their offices from mostly used to the least used. So, for instance, maybe in most of the offices, Apple is the mostly used personal computer. HP may be the second most used personal computer, and subsequently you can rank the usage of computers in your offices depending upon their usage rates. Notice that although ordinal scale ranks preferences of respondents, but it does not provide information about the magnitude of the difference between or among preferences. For instance, if Apple is the most used personal computer and the next used system is HP, what is the magnitude of the difference between rank number one and rank number two? So this is one of the main deficiency in the ordinal scales, and this deficiency is taken into consideration when discussing the third type of scale, which is the interval scale. Uh, okay, the second type of the ordinal scale is the fixed sum scale. So when we talk about fixed sum scale, in the fixed sum scale, you have fixed points, fixed 100 points, and you need to divide these 100 points in such a way that the total number is equivalent to 100. So, for instance, in this particular example, you are asked that indicate the importance you attach to the following five aspects by allotting points for each total 100 in all. So you are required to attach importance to these characteristics while rating a soap. So, for instance, maybe fragrance is one of the most important thing. I would say 30 points to the preference. Color, maybe not very important. 10 points. Shape, maybe not very important. I would say maybe 0 points. Size, maybe not very important. Maybe 0 points. And texture of leather, maybe very important. Okay, so 60 points to the texture of leather. So it total amounts to 100. So this is fixed sum scale. Maybe some respondent would say 20 to fragrance, 20 to color, 20 to shape, 20 to size, and 20 to the texture. For that particular respondent, all characteristics are equally important for that particular respondent. So this is one of the ranking, one of the ways to rank your preferences as well, that you divide your 100 points in such a way that the total is exactly 100. So you can allocate or allot the points for each characteristic according to their relevance to your preferences or not. Okay, so these are the two types of the ordinal scale. Notice that in fixed sum scale as well, the magnitude of the difference among categories is not equal. Okay, so this is one of the problems with the ordinal scale, that yes, you can rank different characteristics, but the difference between ranking is not same, and the difference should be same if you want to measure the mean values. Okay, so I will try to make you understand in this better in the interval scales. Okay, in the interval scale, uh, it not only categorizes the variables and rank orders the categories in some meaningful way, but the distance between the categories is also equal. In other words, the difference between any two values on, on the interval scale is identical. So let's recap the previous two scales to better understand interval scale. The nominal scale allows us only to qualitatively distinguish groups by categorizing them into mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive categories. The ordinal scale allows us to rank order the preferences as well. But interval scale allows us to compare differences between objects. The interval scale taps the differences, taps the order of these differences and the equality of the magnitude of the differences in the variable. So it is more powerful scale as compared to the nominal and ordinal scale. So let me give you some examples. First of all, I would say there are four different types of interval scale, semantic scale, numerical scale, Likert scale, and staple scale. Now, just by understanding the examples of each of these type of interval scale, you will get to know about interval scales in a better way. For instance, the first type of interval scale is semantic differential scale. In semantic differential scale, several bipolar attributes are identified at the extremes of the scale, and respondents are asked to indicate their attitude towards a particular individual, object, or anything of interest on those particular attributes. So the bipolar adjectives used might employ such terms as good to bad, strong to weak, or the examples which we have given here about semantic scales like responsive, unresponsive, beautiful, ugly, courageous, timid. So these are the examples of semantic scale. Notice that they are contradictory terms. They are bipolar terms. The terms are opposite to each other, and there are blank these are the blank options you have. You have to choose. For instance, if you're asked that how do you find the the feedback or the complaint or the service recovery in this particular restaurant, you can either choose along these two continuums. For instance, you say that yes, they are responsive but not that the response was not that quick, so you may choose like this one, which is away from unresponsiveness but not really highly responsive. So you can choose your options depending upon your preference. So this is the example of semantic differential scale. The numerical scale is similar to semantic scale, the difference that the numbers on a 5-point or a 7-point scale are provided with bipolar adjectives at both end of the scale. Like this is the numerical scale. How pleased are you with your real estate agent? So again, there are bipolar adjectives: extremely pleased, extremely displeased. Depending upon your preference, you can you know choose the best appropriate answer. For instance, you are not that much displeased, but you are leaning towards displeasure, so you can choose three. Notice that we discussed about equal distance between the categories. See, this is there is equal distance. The distance between 7 and 6 is exactly 1. The difference between distance between 6 and 5 is exactly 1. The distance between 5 and 4 is exactly 1. Similarly, the difference between each ranking in this particular interval scale is exactly 1. So this is why we said that in the interval scale, the difference between categories is equal. This is very important for you to calculate mean. The mean cannot be calculated if the difference between categories is not equal. So when you can calculate mean, it means that a whole lot of statistical possibilities, they become realizable to you as a researcher. So calculating mean is extremely important to you, if you want to apply various statistical techniques. Okay, so the third scale is Likert scale. The Likert scale example is provided here. Third example is the Likert scale example. The Likert scale is designed to examine how strongly subjects agree or disagree with statements on a 5-point scale or a 7-point scale. So Likert scale is the most widely used approach to scaling responses in a survey research. It generally arrange the responses from strongly disagree to strongly agree. A Likert scale can also assume other extremes like highly unlikely to highly likely. So it is not necessary that Likert scale only uses strongly agree to strongly disagree as response statements. Like in this particular, example, one stands for strongly disagree, two stands for disagree, three stands for neutral, four stands for agree, and five stands for strongly agree. See that the distance between the categories is same and you can calculate the mean. So this is the Likert scale, and Likert scale is the most commonly used scale in business research. Okay. Last type of scale is staple scale. It is one of the types of the interval scale. So the staple scale simultaneously measures both the direction and intensity of the attitude towards the items and the study. So the characteristic of interest to the study is placed at the center with a numerical scale ranging from positive extreme at one end to the negative extreme at the other end. For instance, in this particular example, you are required to rate your supervisor's abilities with respect to these characteristics. For instance, if you want to rate interpersonal skill of your supervisor, now these are directions. This is a positive direction and there is a negative direction. Notice that there is intensity as well. If you believe that your supervisor does not possess sufficient interpersonal skills, then you can go towards the negative you know dimension. But your thinking is extremely negative, okay, it means that you can choose the highest intensity of negativity. So this particular scale, the distance is again, it is same, and it will help you. This scale can help you to measure direction as well as, uh, you know, the intensity of the emotion. Okay, so these are the four types of interval scales. Lastly, uh, most important issues when you are using Likert scale. I'm focusing upon the Likert scale because the Likert scale is most oftenly used in the research. So there are two important points you need to take into consideration while using Likert scale. Either go for 5-point scale or go for the 7-point scale. Either go for balanced scale or go for the unbalanced scale. So let us discuss these points in detail. The psychometric literature suggests that having more scale points is better, but there is a diminishing return after more scale points, which means that if you have more scale points, it is better that, but having a lots of scale points at some point of time furnishes more disadvantages than advantages. So we have a choice to choose, 5 points, 7 points, 9 points, or 11 points Likert scale. But personally, I would say 7-point Likert scale items have been shown to be more accurate, easier to use, and a better reflection of a person's, true evaluation. So if you look at the examples here, in the 5-point scale, it ranges from strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree to strongly agree. But the 7-point scale, it ranges from strongly disagree, disagree, and there are two additional, items. Somewhat disagree, and there is neutral and somewhat agree. So there are two additional items in the two additional choices you can make in the 7-point Likert scale. This is very important as well because, for instance, sometimes you are not, leaning towards neutrality. You are just, vacillating between neutrality and, somewhat disagreement or somewhat agreement. So Likert's, 7-point Likert scale, it it provides you with that particular, option to to have more response options, because sometimes you're not truly neutral, but you're leaning towards positivity or leaning towards negativity, so you can choose these particular responses. So I would say it is better to choose 7-point Likert scale over 5-point Likert scale. Secondly, balanced scale versus unbalanced scale. So balanced scale includes a middle point, a neutral point, usually shown as neither agree nor disagree, or simply as a neutral point in the scale. Unbalanced scale, they do not contain this neutral point, as shown in this particular example, that this is a balanced scale because it has a central point, neither agree nor disagree. This is a neutral point. But this particular scale here it is not balanced. It is there is no neutral point. It ranges from not at all interested to very much interested, but there is no neutral point here. Okay. Uh, the logic behind using unbalanced scale is that many respondents, they have the tendency to choose middle grounds or give neutral answers when responding towards critical matters. So this lead towards error of central tendency when analyzing your responses. Therefore, by using unbalanced scale, we are forcing the respondents to choose a side. So if you doubt that majority of the respondents would choose neutral option in your questionnaire out of diplomacy or social desirability, you can choose unbalanced scales. Uh, for instance, in this particular question, how would you rate your interest in changing current organizational policies? Now, this is a critical question, and many, because this is about change, and many respondents would be willing to, stay neutral here. So they want a categorical response from respondents, and they are forcing respondents to choose a side. Uh, I would recommend using a balanced scale instead of unbalanced scale, as forcing respondents to take a position would build or introduce systematic bias, because when respondents truly have a neutral opinion, you are curbing their neutral opinion. So I would recommend using a 7 points Likert scale, and I would recommend using unbalanced scale when you are sorry, not unbalanced, balanced scale when you are using Likert scale as your measurement tool. Okay, another question which I'm often asked is that what is the difference between scale and questionnaire and question? Now, let me go back to that slide where we were discussing about the scale adaptation. That slide would, clarify this particular question. Okay, for instance, read this particular paragraph. So they say that they have used the scale which is developed by this particular author, Akakoso. This scale has 12 items, 12 questions, and these 12 questions are measured on a 7-point Likert scale, ranging from 1 strongly disagree to 7 strongly agree. Now, this is a very important statement here. It means that they are using Likert scale, but using scale does not mean that you're asking these questions. So they are asking these particular questions. So these are the 12 questions, and these 12 questions are measured on a 7-point Likert scale, which ranges from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So this is the role of scale in your questionnaire. You are measuring the responses on scales. Okay, so you have to find the questionnaires, you have to find these questions through the technique which I discussed, the scale adaptation technique, the 5 steps of scale adaptation. This approach will give you the questions. And the second part which we are discussing here, the research instrument, it will give you the way that how to measure these particular questions. So they measured these particular questions through Likert scale, and as I said before as well, that majority of the business research using questionnaires, they use Likert scale. Okay, so these were the two important issues related to Likert scale. Okay, lastly, we discuss about ratio scales. One of the main characteristic of the interval scale is that it holds no true 0 points or absolute 0 points, which means that interval scales can represent values below zero as well. For example, you can measure temperature below 0 degrees, like -5, -6. This is an example of interval scale. Interval scale has an arbitrary 0 point. So it can measure negative values as well. For instance, it can measure dissatisfaction, it can measure disagreement, it can measure negative emotions in terms of unpleasantness, unresponsiveness, etc., as we have seen in the four types of the interval scale. But ratio scales, uh, they never fall below zero. Ratio scale have true zero or absolute 0 points, which is a meaningful measurement, characteristic as well. So ratio scale doesn't have a negative value, unlike interval scale, because of the absolute zero. So to measure any object on a ratio scale, researchers must first see if the object values can be in negative or not. If it cannot be in negative, then ratio scales can be used. For instance, if you are, trying to find out the exact figure, exact amount, you can use ratio scale. Number one. Number two, you can use ratio scale when the value can never fall below zero. For instance, how many organizations did you work for before joining the system? Now you want an exact answer. Now this number could, it could range from, 0 to 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 to any, reasonable figure. So how many organizations did you work for before joining the system? The answer can never be -1 or -2. Okay. The minimum answer could be 0, that you have never worked for any organization, but the answer could never be -1 or -2. Indicate the number of children, the answer can be 0. The answer cannot be -1 or -2. So this is the ratio scales. When you want exact, answers, you can use ratio scales. When the, the response can never fall below 0, then you can use the ratio scale as well. So, for instance, price of the product, height of the person, weight of the person, market share, length of anything, all these characteristics, they cannot be measured in negative value. So they can be measured on ratio scales. Okay. So this is it for the second section. Any question about the second section? Okay, so let me wrap up the second section. So which instruments to use when you are classifying the personal information in your questionnaire? Mostly nominal scales. And if you are, for instance, measuring, personal information like income, you can use ordinal scale, because, income is more like, ranking. So for income, you can use ordinal scale, but for other information, you can use nominal scales. When you want to measure your variable, follow the original source, like we mentioned in our, the first section, that how you can adopt the scale. Well, mostly in business research, interval scales are used. If you are using interval scale, use Simon Adams interval scale, and use balanced interval scale. About the particular types of interval scale, you can either use Likert scale or attitudinal scales like numerical scale or staple scale. But you have to see that what is, how the original, the researchers who developed the scale have used it. So you need to see the original source as well. So this is the wrap up of your second section. Any question about the second section of today's session? Okay, so let me continue with the final section of today's session, which is about sampling methods. Okay, so this is one of the most important decisions in your research project, that how you will, collect your sample, how would you collect your data, which sampling strategy you will be using. So before, discussing about sampling, let us discuss about the basic, you know, uh, elements, the basic constructs of sampling, like population, element, sample, sampling unit, subject. So these are the basic, uh, you know, uh, part of your sampling method. So let us get familiar with these terms. So the population refers to the entire group of people, events, or things of interest that the researcher wishes to investigate. So if you are studying international students in China, then all the international students studying in China are your population. So according to the estimate of 2019, there are close to 0.5 million international students in China. So if your focus is international students in China, the overall population of international students in China is 0.5 million. And the sample is the subset of population. So it comprises some members selected from it. In other words, some but not all members of population, they form the sample. If 200 members are drawn from a population of 1000 students studying in WKU, then these 200 members can be called as sample of the study. So when we talk about sample, we have to see that a single element of population, single member of population, a single member of population is called as element, and a single member of sample is called as subject. Okay, so our goal as a researcher is that our subject should be as closer, as representative of our element as possible. So a single member of population is called as element, and a single member of sample is called as subject. And our goal as a researcher is that our subject should be representative of a typical element in the population. Otherwise, our sample would not be representative of the population which we are investigating. So this is we will be using these words, elements and subjects, in the coming slide. So you need to be aware of this, that a single member of population is called as elements, and a single member of sample is called as subject. Okay, so what is sampling unit? A sampling unit it refers to a singular value within a sample database. For example, if you are conducting research using a sample of university students, a single university student would be a sampling unit. Okay, so what is the difference between sampling unit and subject? Because subject is also a single member of sample. The difference is the unit of analysis. For instance, we discussed about unit of analysis as well, that if you are doing research on diets, like supervisor and the subordinate interaction. Now, these are two people, supervisor and subordinate. These are basically two subjects, but there are single sampling unit. Okay, so if your research is on supervisor and subordinate interactions, basically you are researching on diets, a group of two people. So that group of two people would be regarded as a sampling unit, as a single sampling unit. But because there are two subjects, there would be two subjects in that particular diet. So basically, sampling unit it refers to your singular value upon which you are basing your analysis. So it is more concerned with the aggregation, the aggregate level of your analysis. So a sampling unit is more about the aggregation of your analysis, and subject is the member of the sample. In dyads, you have two subjects, but they make only a single sampling unit. I hope this examples makes the difference between these two terms clear. Okay, so overall, our main focus is that the sample statistics are able to estimate population parameters. So statistics are the characteristics of sample, and parameters are the characteristics of population. Our main goal is that the mean of the sample is closer to the mean of the population. The standard deviation of the sample is closer to the standard deviation of population, and the variance in the sample is closer to the variance of the population. So this is our main goal. So how can we ensure that our sample is representative of our population? Now, this is what we will discuss in our sampling methods. So basically, there are two ways to sample. Subjects from the elements of the population. One way is the probability sampling method, and the another way is non-probability sampling method. In probability sampling, each element of the population, they have a certain probability of being selected as a subject of the sample. Okay, but in the non-probability sampling, uh, such probabilities are not attached. So there are different types of probability sampling. Let us discuss them one by one. So the first important type of probability sampling is simple random sampling, which means that every element in the population has a known or an equal chance of being selected as a subject. Okay, so every element in the population has an equal chance of being selected as a subject of the sample. So simple random sampling has the least bias and offers the most generalizability in your research. However, this sampling process could become cumbersome and expensive. Why? Because you need an entirely updated listing of population so that you can run some random number generators through computer softwares to randomly select subjects for your sample. For instance, uh, let us say that the population of WKU is 5,000. So there are 5,000 students studying in WKU. Now, if you want to select a sample randomly from the students studying in WKU, let us say that you want to select a sample of 500 students from WKU randomly. You need to have the updated list of those 5,000 students. It sometimes it is not possible to have an updated list. But for instance, if you have an updated list, you contact with the human resource department, you contact with the admissions department, they provide you with the list, and you have a list of 5,000 students, their emails, their WeChats, etc. Everything is there. So now you feed that list in the Excel. Excel is one of the ways to generate random numbers, and you can put a formula that you want 500 randomly generated names. That would be your simple random sampling. Okay, so random sampling is dependent upon your availability of the whole population, in the information about the whole population. But sometimes it is very difficult. For instance, if you're doing research on consumer buying habits, adult consumer buying habits in Vancho city, then you get an updated population list of all the consumers between 18 years and 17 years old. Okay, they would be like, close to, 1 million people maybe. It is quite difficult to have that updated list of each and every consumer between 18 years and 70 years in single city in Vanchu. But on the other hand, if you are investigating companies listed in Shanghai Stock Exchange and you want to randomly select 30 companies, it is possible because there is always an updated list of companies listed in stock exchange, and that list is publicly available to everyone. So you will simply put all the names of the companies in Excel sheet, for instance, and randomly generate the name of 30 companies. So such sampling strategy, the simple random sampling strategy, may not always be feasible when you are using primary data, but it can be very much possible if you are using secondary data, depending upon how you define your population. Okay, so the second strategy is systematic sampling. So the systematic sampling design involves drawing every nth element in the population, starting with a randomly chosen element between 1 and n. For instance, there are 1,000 employees in an organization, and you have an updated list of all the employees working in that organization. So you randomly, choose the word five. Okay, you randomly choose the five number, and you choose every fifth entry in that list. Okay, so there are 1,000 employees in the organization, and you have an updated list of the employees, and you choose every fifth entry in that list. This gives us a sample size of 200 drawn systematically from the population. Again, you need to have an updated population list for systematic sampling as well. If you don't have an updated sampling list, then you cannot, choose that nth element strategy. Okay, so this is a very important requirement for both of these two strategies which we have discussed. The third strategy is stratified sampling. Now, stratified sampling is again a very common strategy. It is used only when there are identifiable subgroups within the population that may be expected to have different values, that may expect to behave differently. So in order to ensure that these subgroups are adequately represented in the sample, we use stratified random sampling method. So the first step in the stratified random sampling, stratified sampling, the first step in the stratified sampling is to divide your population to relevant subgroups. Okay, so the first step is that you divide the population to different groups or stratas that are relevant, appropriate, and meaningful in the context of the study. For instance, if you're doing research on student consumerism, you get this from a literature review that existing research on males and females postulate that both would have different parameters with respect to student consumerism. Maybe females will show more consumerism, or maybe males would show more consumerism. So, depending upon this information, you want to divide, your population into two identifiable subgroups, so that both the groups are equally and appropriately represented in your sample. Sometimes if you don't make these groups, and you then you end up having misappropriate data. Maybe if you don't make this subgroup, out of 100, 80 would be males and 20 members would be females. So this would give a very different skewed results which are not representative of your population. So when you have identifiable subgroups and you believe that those subgroups would behave differently, then you need to choose stratified sampling. This is one of the reasons. Second reason is that when some subgroups are very large and some subgroups are very small, and you believe that those subgroups which are very large would not be appropriately represented, or those subgroups which are very small, they won't be appropriately represented, then you also use stratified sampling in your research. Now, for example, after dividing your population to different subgroups, the second step is to draw sample from the members of each subgroup. Now you can do it in two ways. The first way is to draw sample of members from each group randomly, or you can draw sample of members from each group systematically. So when you do it randomly, it is called as disproportionate sampling. And when you do it systematically, it is called as proportionate sampling. Now let me give you an example. It will make you clear. For instance, we are doing research in an organization. The total population of organization is 710. There are six subgroups, identifiable subgroups in that organization. Now, from top management to middle management to lower management to supervisors to clerks to secretaries. And each population, it has different number. And the size of the population, for instance, the top management is just 10. And there is a large population subgroup as well, like clerks. So in this particular example, we are using stratified sampling. Why? Because we expect that top management it would behave differently as compared to the clerks. And secondly, because top management it has a very small number, and clerks they have a very large number. So when such a situation is prevalent in your populations, you need to use stratified sampling. Now you can either choose elements through random sampling or through systematic sampling. Now, for instance, if you choose elements randomly from each subgroup, now you run the risk of underrepresenting or overrepresenting some subgroups. For instance, when you are choosing randomly, the top management it constitutes 70% of your sample. 70% of the population of top management is part of your sample. But only if you see, clerks, only 60 are part of your sample, which means only maybe 12%. So it means that we are overrepresenting, top management, but we are underrepresenting the clerks because the clerks' size in overall population is around, I would say, 80%. Their ratio in overall population is around 80%, but their ratio in overall sample is maybe around 40%. This is not representative sample. So that is why we call it disproportionate sampling, that when you divide the population into relevant subgroups and then you draw a sample of members from each subgroup randomly, this is called as disproportionate sampling because you run the risk of overrepresenting or underrepresenting some population. On the other hand, if you're using proportionate sampling, you devise a formula, you devise a systematic formula that you will select only 20% of each element, okay, 20% of each subgroup. For instance, if there are 10 members of top management, you will select 20%, which amounts to 2. If there are 500 clerks, you will select only 20%, that amounts to 100. So here your sample is more representative of the subgroups which are in the population. So your sample constitution, your sample, your makeup is basically very much closer to the makeup of your population in the proportionate sampling. So you have a choice when you have identifiable subgroups, and those subgroups may be too large or too small, and you have, you believe that these subgroups would behave differently. Like in this particular example, top management is expected to behave differently, is expected to have different opinions as compared to the clerks. Then you can use stratified sampling. Stratified sampling can be done in two ways: simple random sampling, which is called as disproportionate, or systematic sampling, which is called as proportionate. Okay. Lastly, the last type of sampling is cluster sampling. In cluster sampling, these are the groups that are natural aggregates of elements in population. Okay, let me give you an example that, usually cluster sampling is ideal in scenarios where groups have heterogeneous members. Heterogeneous means diversity. There's a lot of diversity within the group. For instance, a WKU has 4 different faculties, which include College of Business, College of Liberal Arts, College of Science, College of Architecture and Design. So there are 4 faculties in WKU. So we have 4 clusters. So in order to qualify for cluster sampling, we have 2 conditions. The first condition is that each of these faculty, it should have heterogeneous members. Heterogeneous members, that students should come from different background, from different socioeconomic background, from different geographical background. Some come from tier 1 cities, some come from tier 2 cities, some have sciences background, some have different background. If such heterogeneity is available in each subgroup, in each cluster, okay, so each of the 4 faculties have such heterogeneity, such diverse students. This is the first condition. And the second condition is that the heterogeneity within each faculty is comparable. So you can say that the heterogeneity, the diversity in College of Business is at the same level as compared to College of Liberal Arts or College of Science or College of Architecture and Design. If all the four colleges have equal level of heterogeneity, then this is the second condition of cluster sampling. Okay, so if both the conditions are met, if all the four faculties have diverse students, have heterogeneous members, and all four faculties have equal level of heterogeneity, then you can randomly choose a single cluster, and all the members within that cluster will be studied. Now you have four faculties, you can randomly select a single faculty. Maybe you can randomly generate the name of the faculty. And for instance, if the faculty name is College of Liberal Arts, then you need to study all the members within that single faculty, and the results will be generalized to other three faculties. So this is called as cluster sampling. Okay. So there are two conditions of cluster sampling. Each group, for instance, if College of Business and Public Management is not equally diverse as compared to College of Liberal Arts and College of Science and College of Architecture, then cluster sampling cannot be used because the the conditions are not met, because the heterogeneity in a single cluster is not at the same level as the other three clusters. If the heterogeneity is at the similar level, then you can use cluster sampling. If heterogeneity is not at the same level, then you cannot use cluster sampling, because we believe that each cluster is representative of another cluster. Okay. So for instance, if in College of Business there is a male-female ratio is disproportionate, there are 70% females and there are 30% males. But in College of Liberal Arts, there are 50% males and 50% females. It means that they are not equally heterogeneous. It means that we cannot do cluster sampling because one cluster is not replaceable with another cluster. So we cannot apply cluster sampling in that particular scenario. Area sampling is one of the examples of cluster sampling. Area sampling is best suited when the goal of the research is confined to a particular locality or area. In area sampling, clusters consist of particular residential areas, geographical areas such as counties, city blocks, or particular boundaries within a locality. Okay, so let us discuss this example. For instance, a human resource director believes that the staff is resigning and he or she wants to conduct exit interviews. For instance, on Monday, three people resign. On Tuesday, two people resign. On Wednesday, two people resign. So these are the three clusters. So human resource director believed that studying only single cluster would help him or her give a very good idea about why people are resigning. So he chooses or she chooses the cluster on Tuesday, two people who resigned on Tuesday, and just by studying, interviewing them why they have resigned, what are the reasons of their resignation, they can uh, you know generalize the findings to other people that why they are resigning. So this is a very simple example of cluster sampling. Okay. Now let us discuss non-clusters and non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling, the elements in the population do not have any probabilities attached to them being chosen as sample subjects. This means that the findings from the study of the sample cannot be confidently generalized to the population. But researchers at times be less concerned with generalizability and more interested in obtaining some preliminary information in a quick and expensive way. So that is inexpensive way. So that is why non-probability sampling methods are used. Convenience sampling refers to the collection of information from members who are conveniently available to you. Okay, for instance, many of you would collect data from your class fellows, from your friends from the students of WKU, from your family members, because they are conveniently available to you. Okay, so this is convenience sampling. So I would say that many students would be using convenience sampling in their research as compared to the probability sampling methods. So you need to give reasons why you are using convenience sampling. Sometimes it is not instead of obtaining information from those who are most readily or conveniently available to you, it might sometimes become necessary to obtain information from specific target groups. Sampling here is confined to specific types of people who can provide the desired information, either because they are the only ones who have it or they conform to some criteria set by the researcher. This is called as purposive sampling. So we have two types of purposive sampling: judgment sampling and quota sampling. If information sought by researcher is only possessed by few people, then we use judgment sampling method. One of the types of purposive sampling is that judgment sampling method. For instance, if a researcher wants to find out what it takes for women managers to make it to the top, the only people who can give such information, they are the women who have risen to the positions of presidents or vice presidents and important top level executives in organizations. So judgment sampling calls for special effort and gain access to the individuals who have the required information. So sometimes judgment sampling is very difficult because I'm reading assignments. Some students are conducting research from investment bankers, or small medium enterprisers, businessmen. Maybe use judgment sampling because you only want to do research on those about a part of population. You only want to conduct interviews from those people who actually possess that particular information. So getting access is very important thing, very critical matter in judgment sampling, because it is not always easier for you to get access to those information rich participants. Second type is quota sampling. In quota sampling, it ensures that certain groups are adequately represented in the study through the assignments of quota. So generally, a quota fixed for each subgroup is based on proportion of each group to the overall population. In this case, quota sampling is similar to the stratified sampling, but the difference is that the quota sampling selection of sample is on the convenience basis or on the non-probability basis and not on random sampling or systematic sampling basis. So quota sampling may be similar to the stratified sampling, but the main difference is that the selection of subjects in the quota sampling is on convenience basis and not on the probability basis, which is the case with the stratified sampling. Last method of snowball sampling, which is also I think it is suitable for most of the students, is snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is a technique where existing subjects recruit future subjects from their acquaintances or their friends. In this way, the sample group grows like a snowball. So the nature of snowball sampling is such that it cannot be considered as a representative sample, but this sampling technique can be extensively used for conducting research with a population that is hard to locate. For instance, if you are interested in doing research on expatriates or foreigners working in China, usually these expatriates or foreigners, they have online communities or WeChat groups. If you come across a few such people, then they can help you recruit other subjects by disseminating your questionnaire in their respective social circles. So it can grow from single or few people to few hundred people in no time. Okay. Lastly, which sampling methods are the most appropriate one? You need to ask these questions before selecting your sampling strategy. Do you have an updated list of population? If the answer is yes, then you can go for probability sampling technique. If the answer is no, then you need to use non-probability sampling, because you cannot use sampling requirements of the probability sampling. Do you know with certainty the exact size of targeted population? If the answer is no, then again you need to use non-probability sampling. Because these two are linked with each other. If you even if you know the exact size, you have the updated list of the population to use simple random sampling or systematic sampling. Do you have enough resources like time? If the answer is no, then you can use convenience sampling methods. Do you have accessibility to targeted population? If the answer is no, then again you can use convenience sampling. But in case of non-probability sampling strategies like judgment sampling, even accessibility can be issued there as well. What is your type of data? If you are using secondary data, then usually probability sampling is used. You can also use other strategies in secondary data as well, but depending upon the situation. But most often when you are using secondary data, you can use probability sampling strategies more conveniently. Okay, so you need to ask these questions before selecting upon your sampling strategy. Okay, any question about today's session? Any query, any ambiguity? So in our next session, we will discuss about sampling size, we will discuss about reliability and validity of research instruments and your research proposal. This is a brief, outlook for your next session. Any question about today's session, anything which is not clear, which require further explanation? Okay, so let us discuss discussion question number 8. This week's activity is very relevant for your, assignment number 3 as well. For instance, there are several instruments designed by researchers to measure job satisfaction. Now, what are you are required to do? Select one measurement instrument which you consider is appropriately measuring employee satisfaction. Try a job satisfaction scale query. Justify why you have chosen this instrument by discussing its dimensions and questions. Now, by instrument, we do not we mean two things: the scale and the questions. Okay, so for instance, let me go back towards that slide. I'm trying to locate that slide. Okay, let me go manually. The slide number, the slide which we discussed in the beginning of our session. Yeah, no, not this one. Yeah, this one. So in this slide, it is categorically mentioned that which scale is used, okay, which dimensions of that scale possess, how many questions are there, and which particular research instrument you will be using, like the Likert scale will be used. So you need to provide these information in your discussion question. You do argue that why do you think that academic entitlement, these 12 questions, they better define academic entitlement as compared to any other scale which is in the among the researchers. So you need to categorically define why you have chosen that scale. So there are plenty of scales to measure job satisfaction, and you will see that when you will put this particular query, the job satisfaction scale query on Google Scholar, you will see that there are plenty of scales to measure job satisfaction. So you need to justify why. You need to discuss the dimensions and questions and the particular instrument which they have used, like Likert scale or any other scale they have used. And why do you think, part number B, do you think it appropriately measures the concept of employee satisfaction? why you have not chosen any alternative measures. Okay. The part number C is to select instrument, compare your instrument with two other students, not three, two other students who have chosen a different instrument, not the same instrument, have chosen a different instrument to measure job satisfaction. So evaluate the strengths your choice of instrument presents over theirs. Okay, so this is a particular activity for this week. The Friday 30th is the deadline for initial post, and deadline for responses is Sunday 1st November. Any ambiguity about discussion question? Any question? Anything which is not clear about this particular discussion question? Okay, so let me reiterate your assignment number 3 as well. Your assignment number 3 has these 10 thoughts. Here it is time frame. So your first 3 sections should they are directly related to your assignment number 1, assignment number 2, and they should not be more than 350 words. And your assignment number 3 is more about these 7 particular sections: your study design, your data collection methods, your sampling strategy, your research instruments. You need to present your final research instrument in the appendix. If you're using a questionnaire, please attach your final version of your questionnaire to this assignment. If you're using interviews, please attach your final version of interviews, what kind of questions you will be asking with this particular assignment. If you're using secondary data, please discuss the equations or how you will collect data through secondary sources. The complete plan of your the research instrument tool shall be presented in your assignment number 3. I will discuss in detail in my next lecture as well. Please start writing important parts of your assignment like study design, data collection method, research instruments, etc. I have increased the plagiarism ratio to 15% to accommodate the first 3 sections. So the first 3 sections may be lifted from your assignment number 1 and 2, but still I expect that you do not directly copy paste. You summarize your assignments and put them in your this particular assignment. So I'm giving you a room of 13%. Your overall word limit should be between 1300 and 500, 1500 words. The limit for submission is 10th November. Please follow this submission limit because many students, they were late in submission of their assignment number 2, and so they have to face some heavy penalty. And this is 15% of your grade. So this assignment is extremely important. Okay, any question regarding your assignment or discussion activity or today's session? Any question? Okay, please go through the recording. I will share the link in. Okay, we need 2 skills, right? Uh, Not really. You need to choose a single scale. You need to choose a single scale. You need to compare, with your scale with other students. Those students who have chosen a different scale. So I would say that, I would encourage students to choose different scales. For instance, if the whole class have chosen a single scale for job satisfaction, then the requirement number C cannot be fulfilled. So you need to choose a single scale, and then you need to compare it with 2 other scales which have been chosen by 2 other students. Is it clear? So two other students who have chosen a different scale to measure job satisfaction. So you need to choose one scale. You need to focus on a single scale, the scale which you consider is the superior one, because when you type job satisfaction, there are plenty of ways to measure job satisfaction. You know, there are maybe 15, 20, 30 ways to measure job satisfaction. So you need to choose the single best way to measure job satisfaction and compare it with two other students who have chosen different ways, and compare your selection with their selection. Is it clear? Well, you can answer this question because, like we discussed in our first section of skill adaptation, that there are two ways to measure student consumerism. The first way, for instance, you can say that in the first scale there were only 5 questions. In the second scale there were 16 questions. In the beginning of this session, we discussed about student consumerism. In the first scale, there were 5 questions, and the second scale, there were 16 questions. So you can give reasons that I have chosen the scale with 5 questions because it is more simple, it is more easier to answer, it is more shorter. So it adequately defines student consumerism, and that is why I have not chosen the 16 item scale, because it is cumbersome, it is tiresome, it is very lengthy, and it the concept can be defined in 5 questions. Why I should choose 16 questions? Okay, so you need to give reasons, and you need to give the similar reasons in your assignment number 3 as well, that why you have chosen your particular scale, because it is a very important question. It is a matter of operationalization. Okay, is it clear? Okay, great. Any other question? Anything which is not clear? Okay, I will put the link. I will make an announcement about this lecture. I will put a link. Please go through the recording. And if anything is not clear, please feel free to discuss with me. You can ask me questions on WeChat or or through email. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. Bye bye.